Today's lesson is fascinating details about airplane design. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
Welcome to our program. And today we're talking about flying. Yeah, it's the end of August, and you're probably all going back to school, so you can't really justify going overseas for a vacation right now. But in the future, you will have this opportunity. And when you do that, you're no doubt going to be flying in an airplane.
Absolutely, and airplanes are almost common these days. I don't think many people get past their teenage years without having traveled in an airplane. Not only are they common and easy to find routes to almost any part of the world, but the cost of flying in an airplane has really gone down over the last few decades. So yeah, they're absolutely incredible. We hear about them occasionally on the news, and it did seem that kind of at the beginning of 2025, we had sort of a rash of airplane incidents, but generally I think they still are, often called the safest form of transportation. When they do have incidents, it is spectacular, and often many people get hurt, but these are rarities. And so we're going to be finding out about some really interesting airplane details, about airplane design, things that were always considered to be a critical part of building a safe airplane, and also things that engineers and scientists have learned over the years with airplane travel. As we do things more often, we become better at them and learn more about them. So we're going to learn a bunch of interesting facts about airplanes and things that hopefully will give you more reassurance the next time you do get on a plane that these are very well designed and safe machines. So let's get into our article by listening to the first paragraph.
Fascinating details about airplane design.
Airplanes are incredible machines, with every part of their design carefully planned to serve a purpose. But it turns out you don't have to be an aeronautical engineer to understand the reasoning behind these design choices. So, without further delay, let's explore some of the whys of airplane design.
大家好，标题中介绍形容词 fascinating， 它的意思是吸引人的，非常有趣的。例如 Professor Lowe's speech about Mars was truly fascinating. Lowe 教授关于火星的演讲确实很吸引人。或者 The film festival included a number of fascinating documentaries. 那个影展包含好几部非常有趣的纪录片。再来看到形容词 aeronautical， 表示航空的。例如 The university offers a specialized course in aeronautical engineering. 这所大学提供一门专门的航空工程课程。或是 The new aeronautical technology will reduce fuel consumption on long-distance flights. 这项新的航空科技将减少长途飞行的燃料消耗。继续看到名词 reasoning， 表示推理、推断、论证。例如 We must use logical reasoning when solving complex problems. 我们在解决复杂问题时必须使用逻辑推理。或是The student's essay showed strong analytical reasoning skills. 这位学生的作文展现出优秀的分析推理能力。下一个看到片语 without further delay， 表示事不宜迟，刻不容缓。例如 Without further delay, let's begin the meeting and go over the agenda. 事不宜迟，我们开始会议并讨论议程吧。也可以说Without further delay, the firefighters rushed into the burning building. 事不宜迟，消防员冲进了燃烧中的大楼。
Okay, it's time for us to talk about the first paragraph. Let's talk about the title a little bit first here. We've got some fascinating details about the design of airplanes. So if something's fascinating, it's extremely interesting, and you want to learn more about that. So, of course, there are lots of features of airplane design that we're going to cover today, but of course, there are many more that we don't have time to cover. So, yes, you might be interested in exploring this topic some more. Now, here in the first paragraph, it says, Airplanes are incredibly incredible machines with every part of their design carefully planned to serve a purpose. So indeed, you're sending a lot of people into the sky, and you want to make sure they go into the sky and back down to the ground in one piece. You don't want them to get killed or end up in a crash. Of course, these airplanes over 100 years or so have been designed. They've tried some things, they've tried other things, and we've arrived at the current design that we have. And yes, indeed, they are quite incredible, and every part is carefully planned for a reason.
Absolutely, for a reason, to serve a purpose or to do a specific thing. In other words, keep the airplane flying and keep the passengers inside safe. But the article says it turns out you don't have to be an aeronautical engineer to understand the reasoning behind these design choices. I don't think I'm giving out any secrets by saying that airplanes are incredibly complicated machines. And actually having a big, large, heavy machine like that fly, it does take quite a bit of science. And if you want to know all about that, then I suggest going to school and studying to be an aeronautical engineer. Aeronautical is basically the science of flying machines. If you're an aeronautical engineer, you would know all about the design of airplanes and helicopters too, I would imagine. All the different things you need to know about wings and creating lift and engines and drag and all that kind of stuff that really has a lot to do with some pretty heavy science and some pretty complicated mathematics. But as the article says, you don't need that level of expertise. You don't have to be an aeronautical engineer to understand the reasoning behind these design choices. When we talk about reasoning, well, we're talking about the reasons for something, why something happens, and also the logic behind these design choices, why these things are there, how they came to be there, and what exactly they are doing. These design choices that allow airplanes to be safer and safer the more we know about them. So, without further delay, let's explore some of the whys of airplane design. Yes, we don't want to pause here too much. We don't want to talk too much about planes and how beautiful they are and what our favorite airline is or anything. So without further delay, without wasting more of your time, let's get to it. Let's get to the facts. We're going to explore some of the whys of airplane design. We'll be answering a lot of why questions. Why are airplanes like this? Why this? Why that? Let's get to it with our first big question, which is actually a really interesting one. We're going to hear about it right now. Why are airplanes almost always painted white? Most airplanes are painted white because white reflects sunlight and helps keep the aircraft cool. White paint also allows any damage, such as cracks or oil leaks, to be seen more easily. Finally, colored paints fade over time, which makes white paint a cheaper option. Why are airplane windows round? Early passenger planes had square windows, but engineers discovered that the corners of these windows created weak points in the airplane structure. As a result, air pressure changes could cause dangerous stress cracks. Round windows distribute pressure more evenly, reducing the risk of structural failure.
第二部分看到名词 crack， 它的意思是裂缝、缝隙。例如 My smartphone screen has a large crack near the camera. 我的智慧型手机萤幕接近镜头的地方有一条大裂缝。也可以说 There is a large crack in the sidewalk. 人行道上有条很大的裂缝。后面看到 distribute 这个单字，它是动词，指分散、分配、分发。例如 I carefully distributed the items on the desk. 我小心地分配桌上的物品。再看一个例子 They distributed the food to the boys. 他们把食物分配给那些男孩。最后介绍形容词 structural， 指的是结构上的、构造上的。举例来说 The new CEO made several structural changes to the company. 新任执行长对公司进行了好几个结构性的改变。又或者说The apartment building suffered immense structural damage as a result of the fire. 这栋公寓大楼因火灾而遭受严重的结构损害。另外补充这个字的名词 structure, S-T-R-U-C-T-U-R-E, structure, 指结构、构造、结构体。造个例句 The accident damaged the structure of the car. 这场车祸损坏了车子的结构。另外一句 We're learning about the cell structure in science class. 我们正在科学课上学细胞的构造。
Okay, so part 2 of our article for today begins with the word why. So why are airplanes almost always painted white? Yeah, I never really noticed that airplanes are indeed almost always painted white. I remember in the past some airlines are painted different colors, but they're never really dark. I think Korean Airlines at one time painted their planes light blue or something like that, kind of an aqua, teal kind of color. That was many years ago, but it was still a very light color. But if you look at most airplanes like United or China Airlines or Eva Air or whatever, most of their planes are painted white. Why is that? Why do they do that?
Very good question. Let's find out. It says most airplanes are painted white because white reflects sunlight and helps keep the aircraft cool. Okay, well, I'm glad we don't have to be an aeronautical engineer to understand that. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. White is a great color for reflecting sunlight. They say on a hot day, if you're going to be out in the sun, wear white clothing. It won't warm up your body as quickly as if you're wearing dark colors like blue or black or something. So white reflects the sunlight and the heat, of course, created by the sunlight. It bounces back, and that keeps the aircraft cool, meaning the aircraft can use less power and less fuel in the engines to power the air conditioning units. So that's a pretty logical one. I think there's different parts of the world where they're trying to get people to paint the roofs of their houses white as well, right? To reflect the light for the same reason, to save on air conditioning fees. But then it also says white paint also allows any damage, such as cracks or oil leaks, to be seen more easily. Interesting. Now, that one maybe is not so logical or not so easy to guess, but once we hear it, yeah, it makes perfect sense. It sounds very reasonable. White, the color, will allow little cracks, oil leaks, little lines of damage, or just any marks on the body of the plane, on the white body of the plane, to be seen more easily. They're more visible, they stand out. And of course, things such as cracks or oil leaks in a plane are a sign of some kind of mechanical problem. Something is wrong with the plane, or something much more serious could be going on, as in a crack. A crack is basically a break in the surface of something, usually something quite hard. We will talk about a hard surface cracking. Something softer like your skin or a piece of fabric, that might get cut or torn or ripped or something like that. But a crack would be maybe in a glass. If you knock it against something when you're washing it, it won't break, but you'll see that sort of split in the surface of it. And of course, that will be a weak point. And of course, in an airplane, having a crack, having a weak point in the body or the skin, we often use that term skin, the metal skin of the airplane, that can be a very serious issue.
Indeed. So, of course, if planes are painted black or something, you won't be able to see those cracks so easily. So that's one reason why planes are painted white as well. And finally, colored paints fade over time, which makes white paint a cheaper option. So as you know, if you have old photographs and you've had them on the wall or whatever, you know that they fade with time and the colors are no longer as bright and vibrant as they used to be. And that happens with planes as well. The colors will fade over time, and so white paint is a cheaper option because, hey, white really can't fade. Sometimes it kind of yellows a little bit, but for the most part, white paint does not fade too much. Now, here's the next question. Why are airplane windows round? They're not really round like a circle, but they just have kind of rounded corners on them. Yeah, why is that? Why are they round? They're not as round as the windows in some ships, for example. Yeah, the ones in airplanes are kind of like maybe ovals, I guess, in a way, or how would you describe that shape?
Yeah, well, sort of oval or like a rounded square or rectangle, but definitely not square like windows you often see in buildings or things like that with those very sharp 90-degree corners. But actually, that's the way many passenger planes were designed long ago. It says early passenger planes had square windows, but engineers discovered that the corners of these windows created weak points in the airplane structure. I believe one of the first commercial jet planes, the British-designed Comet, had lovely big square windows, and that was one of the selling points of this plane. Passengers can have panoramic views. They can have wonderful views out the windows. But unfortunately, those planes started to crash. They were falling out of the sky in the middle of their flights. I think it eventually did was they submerged one of these planes in a tank of water. They pumped it full of air, and they discovered that the air pressure will cause splits in the windows where they meet in those corners. Those 90-degree corners were the weak spots of these planes. It obviously, I think there were 3 or 4 major airplane crashes. This would be in the late 40s, early 1950s. But they discovered that these 90-degree corners, these square corners, were very, very weak. And that's the reason why they changed the shape of these airplane windows. So as a result, it says air pressure changes could cause dangerous stress cracks. And that's what they proved by that very original, unprecedented full tank test with the Comet airplane.
Indeed, and the final sentence in this part of our article says, round windows distribute pressure more evenly, reducing the risk of structural failure. Okay, so round windows will distribute that pressure more evenly. So here we've got the verb to distribute. That just means to take something and spread it over a larger area, to deal out, to give shares of something or portions of something. You send them out in different areas. If you manufacture a product, for example, you want to distribute the product throughout the island of Taiwan, so every 7-Eleven sells your product or whatever. If it's like tea or some kind of snack or something, you want to talk about distribution. That's the noun form. And here, the pressure is distributed more evenly, and as a result, that reduces the risk of structural failure. Structural, that's kind of hard to say. Structural. That just has to do with the structure of the airplane, how it's built, what materials they use, how it's supported, and stuff like that. So yes, indeed, if you distribute that pressure more evenly, then the plane won't be wrecked as a result.
Very interesting. And that's, of course, why we have round submarines and round cans and round tanks for air, oxygen or things like that. The round shape is much stronger than a shape with square corners. Let's move on to the final question for today. We have another why question coming up, so let's go listen to that. Then we'll be back. Why do airplane windows have a tiny hole in the glass? Each airplane window has a small hole to help regulate the pressure between the cabin and the outside air. This hole also prevents fogging and freezing, providing a clear view throughout the flight.
Okay, so here's another why question. Why do airplane windows have a tiny hole in the glass? I didn't really notice that until I heard this posted online somewhere. If you notice, the next time you take a plane, there's a tiny little hole in the window. And why is that? Why is there a tiny little hole in the glass? Well, each airplane window has a small hole to help regulate the pressure between the cabin and the outside air. So here, to regulate just means to control. We often have governments regulate things in society. Maybe prices of gasoline are regulated so consumers don't have to pay too much money to fill up their cars with gasoline or whatever. And yes, it controls the pressure between the cabin and the air from the outside, although I'm not really sure it would connect directly outside the plane. Wouldn't that kind of affect the pressure of the cabin?
It absolutely would, yeah. So I think this is just very small amounts of a change. Of course, the airplane is not fully sealed. You have to allow for some leaks to appear here and there, and so they just have these little holes in each window, and it allows for little micro changes, micro adjustments in the air pressure. And it also says this hole also prevents fogging and freezing, providing a clear view throughout the flight. Because, of course, if you've been in a plane and looked at that information panel that they often have on your little personal TV, if you look at the flight data, it's like minus 40 degrees Celsius up there when you're flying really, really high in the atmosphere. And this, of course, could cause fogging and freezing. There's moisture inside the plane and a warmer temperature. There's very cold, dry air outside the plane. If you've ever had a window with 2 pieces of glass in the wintertime, you might notice that we get what's called frost. It's sort of like frozen water vapor sticks to the inside of one of the surfaces of the windows because of the temperature difference between outside and inside. And in the same way, that could happen in an airplane flying very high at altitude in very, very freezing temperatures. And passengers might complain. People want to look out of the window when they're flying really high and see the world below them. Well, to prevent fogging and freezing from sort of covering the window with moisture or frost or something like that, they have these little holes that also help to control the humidity and the moisture within those 2 panes of glass, providing you a clear view throughout the flight. Those wonderful panoramic views that a lot of people love to enjoy or even take photos of when they are mid-flight.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Here comes our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分第二句提到，事实证明你不用是航空工程师也能理解这些设计选择背后的道理。文中是用 It turns out 来表达事实证明怎么样怎么样。那这边我们来整理 turn out 的用法。Turn out 它表示结果是，最后演变成什么什么，用来带出事情的发展或最终结果，尤其是指出乎意料的结果。那我们来看几个相关句型。第一个是 turn out to be 加上名词或形容词，可以表达最后成为什么，最后被发现可能是具有某种身份啊、特性、能力等等。例如 The movie turned out to be a disaster， 那部电影结果变成一场灾难。好，那第二个补充的句型是 It turns out that 主词加动词，这表示结果发现怎么样怎么样。例如 It turns out that they have known each other for a long time， 结果发现他们已经认识彼此很久了。第三个介绍句型是 As it turns out， 逗号主词加动词，那这个句型可以用来说明某事的后续发展有令人意外的结果或情况，类似中文说的结果是怎么样，结果证明怎么样怎么样。例如As it turned out, they were right to have left early. 结果证明他们早点离开是正确的。好，课文第二部分有解释为什么飞机的窗户是圆的，因为圆形窗户能更平均分散压力，降低了结构失效的风险。文中用动词 distribute 来表达分散分配，它也有分发的意思。那我们来学习它的字首字根。先看到 tribute， 它当单字当名词有贡品、贡献或者是致敬的意思。那它当字根则是有给予、分配的语义。在 distribute 这个字当中，它的字首 dis 有个别分开的意思。那字根 tribute 表示给予、分配。那当我们个别分配物品，一个一个给，就不难联想 distribute 它有分配分发的语义了。好，我们顺便补充两个有相同字根的单字。第一个补充 contribute， 字首 con 它表示一起， tribute 表示给予贡献，字面意思看起来就是一起贡献、一起给予，这样应该可以联想到 contribute 它表示捐献、做出贡献、为什么什么贡献的意思。好，那第二个补充的是 retribution，它是拼作 retribution， 那这个字首 re 表示往回， tribut 就是来自 tribute 表示分配给予， ion 是名词字尾，我们可以用予以回报，给予相对应的回报惩处去联想到 retribution 它有报应、严惩的意思。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Fascinating.At lunch today, Stacy told us a fascinating tale that kept everyone listening. Crack. There's a long crack in the wall which resulted from the recent earthquake. Distribute. With a little wind, the seeds of the flower will be distributed over a large area. Structural. Engineers are scheduled to inspect the old bridge to check for any structural damage. Regulate. The air conditioner helps regulate the temperature in the room.Making it cooler on hot days.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Mike.
See you next time.